Greetings everyone, welcome to Module 4 of the SOLIDWORKS course. In this module we will be looking at several advanced features and techniques to do the solid modeling of components. We're going to start off with linked dimensions, global variables, sensors, and equations. I'm going to start off with a new part and create a geometry at the origin, a rectangular sketch. I'm going to assign the dimensions as, let's say, 100 millimeters by 200 millimeters. Click OK. And I will simply extrude it by the default 10 millimeters depth. So this is the part model that I have. And now let's talk about the linked dimensions. So in order to provide the linked dimensions, what I'm going to do is first create another feature, for example fillet, and let's say I add a fillet of 10 millimeters radius on one corner, and I'll create another fillet on the other corner, but this time I'm going to change the radius to 20 millimeters. So now let us say if we want to link these two dimensions here, all we have to do is click on one of the dimensions that we want to keep the base dimension of, right click on that dimension and then click on link values. We can even give a name, let's say link fillet, and you can see the value of 20 millimeters is grayed out, which is basically the base value for that link, and then click OK. Once you click on the check mark and come back to see this dimension again, you would notice that next to the dimension there is a symbol infinity is provided that corresponds to the value or the dimension which is being linked. Now I can link this dimension to other dimension. For example, if I want to make this radius as linked with the other radius value, so I can click on that feature, right click on the dimension, and I can then click on the link values. From the drop down arrow I can see the link fillet option appears, which we've just created for another feature, and if I click OK, click on the check mark, and then if I rebuild this part, you would notice the radius is now changed to 20 millimeters because we have used the link 1 with corresponding to the other feature. So if I change for example this value from, let's say, 20 to 40 millimeters, you would notice the other linked dimension also takes the change automatically, and the value also gets adjusted. So that is how the linked dimensions we can provide for different features in the solid model. On the feature manager tree, if I expand the equations, I can notice the option link fillet equal to 40 millimeter has already been created here. We can now talk about the global variables, because global variables we can also create on the dimensions in the components, and then take a look at the equations, which is a bit one step further ahead than the linked values, where we can even assign the equations and the relationships between the two global variables. So first let's start by creating a global variable. First I'm going to create a feature on the face. Let me create a circle, and if I now assign the smart dimension, instead of typing a hard number here, if I type in equal to, and then if I click on if I use a letter, for example A, and then click on this little green check mark here, if there is no global variable assigned with that particular letter, SOLIDWORKS is going to ask you, do you want to create a new global variable named A? I'm going to click yes, and then click on the check mark. So you would notice a symbol of summation that appears next to the dimension, and that is the global variable a, which we have created. So if I click OK and look under the equations, I can notice that the global variable a has been created. I can go to features, and let's say I use the extrude cut. And here also I can do the same thing as type in equal to global variable, if I say b, and then click OK. Create a new global variable b, yes, and the default value 10 mm is selected. I'm going to click on the check mark to finish this feature. So we can keep on creating these global variables. We can even go back to boss extrude, right click on it, edit sketch, and instead of this 100 millimeters and 200 millimeters, what I'm going to be doing is assigning the dimension as the global variables. Type equal to let's say c, equal to, create a new global variable, yes, and then click OK, and then click on the check mark. For a moment, I'm not going to assign any dimension on this length of this rectangle, and we're going to take a look at another way of creating the global variable for assigning the dimension to it. I'm going to click on the check mark and come out of it. I can notice the global variables are also created here. There is other way of creating the global variable, which is going into the tools and then click on equations. Once you do that, a pop-up window appears where you can define the global variables and their dimensions or the values, and also if there are any associated equations with them. The other way to do that is right click on the equations and then click on manage equations, and the same window will appear. Here you would notice any linked values that you have provided will be displayed, as well as any global variables that you have assigned will be also displayed. We can add a new global variable here. If I click on the new global variable and name it as d, hit the tab, and let's say we assign the value of 200 millimeters, and then click OK. So notice the new global variable d is created, and if I right click on the boss extrude, go to edit sketch, smart dimension, and if I type in here equal to, now since we have the global variable created, I can simply go to global variables and then click on this global variable, click on the check mark, click OK, and so you can notice the global variable is created. Come out of the sketching mode. The advantage of doing these global variables is that you can easily change the dimensions without actually having to find out where the dimensions are required to be changed. If you have several features in your part file, and if you need to change those global variables, then it becomes easier to do it through the equation. So all we have to do is right click on the manage equations and just simply change the values here. I can use this as 50 millimeters. Let's say the value of b, we make it as 15. I'm going to change the length and the breadth also. So I'm going to make it as 200 millimeters by 400 millimeters. And then once I click OK, you would notice the part dimensions also changed by simply changing the numbers on the equations, manage equations pop-up window with the help of the global variables. What are the sensors? So the sensors, if I right click on the sensor and say add sensor, it can give us the numbers displayed in the feature manager design tree as the simulation data or mass properties or dimensions, measurement, or even costing data. So if I use the mass properties and select this whole part for which we want to assign the mass, and I'm going to click OK, currently we haven't specified any material, so first thing I'm going to go is right click and click on the plain carbon steel and expand this sensors. So I see the mass, which is 6033.28 grams, is displayed here. If I right click on the equations, go to manage equations, and if I change the let us say the overall dimensions to 150 by 300, naturally we expect the mass to go down, and then click OK. So you would notice the mass has also adjusted accordingly, and we don't really need to go to evaluate mass properties to verify what is the mass of the solid model. Once we add a sensor, we can just quickly see the numbers updated in the sensors area here in the design tree. Now we'll take a look at how to use the equations from the global variables. If I right click on the equations and go to manage equations, I can assign the relationship between the global variables. For example, let us say that I want the dimension C to be equal to 2/3 of the dimension D. I can write the equation such as C equals to, I'm going to put this in parentheses, 2/3 times the global dimension D, and once I click OK, the numbers are going to be calculated and adjusted accordingly. So click OK, and the numbers will be changed. So now since C has a relationship of D, we don't really need to worry about the dimension C. So if I go back to manage equations, and if I change D, the dimension of D equal to, let us say, 600 millimeters, accordingly the dimension in the C also can be changed automatically, and the part can be modified accordingly. So we can take the advantage of global variables, the linked dimensions, as well as equations when there are multiple variables present in the design, and there are several features that we need to create on a solid model. The use of linked dimensions, global variables, the equations, and sensors to check the mass properties of the solid model becomes very handy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video of this module.